Welcome all. Welcome to this demonstration of ArchivesSpace, an overview of ArchivesSpace member benefits. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace. This session is intended for people considering using ArchivesSpace. If you're already an ArchivesSpace user and hopefully member, this presentation will probably not offer any new information, but you're more than welcome to attend. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the ArchivesSpace program before moving to a light demonstration of the application itself. After, I'll provide information about ArchivesSpace membership and member benefits. We're using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this demo, which is version 3.5. If you're using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace at your organization, and we'll be focusing this demonstration on using the ArchivesSpace staff user interface and very briefly the public user interface. If you have a question or an issue with your own implementation, please feel free to email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. This session is being recorded and all presentation slides and links will be made available with the recording. So, what is ArchivesSpace? ArchivesSpace is an open source content management system used by archivists in a variety of settings to manage and describe their collections and optionally make those collections publicly available through our public user interface. ArchivesSpace supports a range of functions performed in archives and special collections, including accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access, and allows archivists to describe a variety of materials, including both physical items and digital objects, including born digital materials in one central location. ArchivesSpace is the successor to two widely used open source applications, Archivist Toolkit and Archon. We know many archives continue to use these two systems, and we do have migration tools available on our website for those users looking to migrate to ArchivesSpace from these legacy systems. In short, ArchivesSpace is developed by archivists, supported by diverse archival repositories, and fills a common need for archives around the world. ArchivesSpace is also a community. While the application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Only organizations that are members of ArchivesSpace directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, and because of that support, members of ArchivesSpace are entitled to certain tangible benefits, and I'm going to get into those after the demo. But in addition to these benefits, members also serve on the various governance groups within ArchivesSpace, including our User Advisory Council, Technical Advisory Council, and Board. Members are also asked to participate in community discussions and polls about the future development of the application. And in this way, ArchivesSpace members work together to create and improve an archives management application reflecting our values as archivists. That means ArchivesSpace is standards-driven, flexible and extensible, customizable and localizable, integrates with other applications people use to do their work, and promotes efficiency overall. And finally, ArchivesSpace is a community. It provides an opportunity for archivists to manage and make available as much of their archival material as possible, no matter their institutional setting. We have ArchivesSpace members working in large government archives and major academic institutions, as well as community archives and loaner rangers working in very small organizations. ArchivesSpace promotes adoptions of standards and develops shared best practices across all of these organizations. It brings people from different sizes and types of institutions together to solve common problems we all share. ArchivesSpace also provides the opportunity to take all of this work, all of this archival description, and make it available to users via a public user interface, which we're going to see a little bit later. So with that, I'll go ahead and move into the demonstration portion of this session. All right. So before we begin, just a note, in this demonstration, I'll spend most of our time exploring the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. This is where archivists and those working to describe material will also be spending most of their time. And then I'll move over to the ArchivesSpace public user interface very briefly to show what ArchivesSpace looks like for researchers and patrons. And then again, before I dive into the demo, I want to mention that all of the examples we're using today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training, and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data for users. We're very grateful to these organizations for their willingness to share their data. So with that, we'll move into the demonstration. Please feel free to ask any questions throughout. I am going to hold all of the questions until the end. I do ask that you use the Q&A. It's a little bit easier to manage that way, but either way, we will get to your questions. So what you're seeing right now is the ArchivesSpace staff user interface home screen. It is, let me move some windows. There's too many windows happening. It's sort of basic looking when you see it, but there's actually a lot that you can do from here. And I'm going to talk about some of the functions that you can invoke from the staff user interface. We say that there are 4 primary zones or areas in the staff user interface that you can invoke from here, and I'm going to break them down that way. So the first set of functions that you can enact from the staff user interface relate to either repository management, meaning for your entire repository at your organization, or through the application-wide implications. So these are things that most people at your organization are not going to have the permissions to do, maybe just one person in different repositories on campus. The first thing that you can do is if you are an organization that is using multiple repositories in your ArchivesSpace implementation, you can invoke those here. You can move between your repositories here. Not every organization is going to do this, but this might be an example. If you're an organization that has multiple divisions or departments or multiple libraries, you may want to set up an individual repository for each of these divisions or departments so that you can control your own records, right? But if it's not necessary for you, you don't need to worry about this. But if you are someone who has administrative privileges and needs to move between repositories at your organization, you would do that here. I want to stay in my repository though. Another set of permissions that you can enact here is the system level permissions. So all of these, again, this is dependent on the permissions of the user. If you are a user who does not have the ability to control any of these settings, you will not see these settings. So for a user that does not have this level of permission, when they hit the system dropdown, all they're going to see is this ArchivesSpace Help Center link. And if you are an ArchivesSpace member organization and have an ArchivesSpace Help Center account, you could click that and it would take you to the ArchivesSpace Help Center. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that is where we have our user manual, our user tutorial videos, which are short digestible videos that cover a brief or single area of the application, as well as recordings of past trainings, which are much longer and do deeper dives into areas of the application. So if you don't have the level of permissions, that would all you'd be able to see here. But if you do have permissions, this is where you could do things like manage your controlled value list, there are many drop downs throughout the application, and you may want to add values to those lists. You can do that here if it's a customizable list. You also can do things like manage your container and location profiles here. We definitely don't have time to get into space management and container management in this demo, but just know that you can manage those profiles here. And these are all shared record types. So that is why they are things that you would want to make sure someone with the appropriate permissions is making the changes. It's not specific to one user. You also can manage repositories here if you need to make changes to your repositories or add a repository, manage your OAI PMH settings if you're taking use of making use of that. Manage users. So if you're someone that manages user accounts, you could do that here. And then you can also view the system information, which if you would like to see just a sort of a snapshot of your system information, you can access that there. Finally, this is when you're logged in, this is your screen name here. I'm logged in as admin, obviously, for the purposes of this demo. Next to that, you have preference management. So again, dependent on your level of permissions, you would either have all 3 of these options or 2 or 1. The single level of permissions is for the individual user. So if you want the application to display in a certain language, or if you want, as the user, the application to show you certain information when you're browsing for records, you want the browse screen to provide you with certain columns of information, you can set that for yourself. If you have the permissions at the repository level, meaning a single repository within the application, and you want to set across the board, you always want your browse screens to look a certain way. You could do that there, or globally for the entire application. If you wanted to make a change to the application, you could do that as well. Some other handy tools here, the ability to become a user. So if you're managing someone who is saying, I'm just not seeing what you're seeing, I'm struggling, you can log in as them and see exactly what's going on. And again, manage user accounts. So these are very high level permissions. And like I said, not everyone at your organization would probably have access to all of this functionality. While we're here, one thing I will point out, and you will see them all throughout this demonstration and throughout the application, are these little question marks. These are content-sensitive help links. Anywhere you see a question mark, that means that there is a related page in our user manual. So if you click that and you are a member who has access to the Help Center, you will be taken directly to the relevant page. It's very helpful if you have a question while you're working. So you'll see those throughout the application. The next area of the staff user interface is directly below the section we just looked at. So this is where you really get into user permissions and some preference management. If we go ahead and drop down here, you can see all of the tools that you can access this way. This is primarily related to user access. So if you want to manage groups, so you would group your users according to their permission groups. You could do that here, manage individual user access here. Again, these are all dependent on permission level, but if you are making use of the assessments module in ArchivesSpace, meaning you're doing assessments of your materials and recording them in ArchivesSpace, and you want to change the attributes that you're assessing, you could do that here. And again, if you want to do some bulk operations related to your top containers, meaning things like your boxes, right, where you're physically, where you're keeping the material, what you're keeping it in, you could do that here as well. You could also transfer a repository into another repository. That's something you will do likely rarely or never, hopefully, but that is, again, related to permissions. Other really great functionality here, the ability to run a background job. There are many different background jobs you might want to run in ArchivesSpace. For example, if you want to generate a PDF of a collection so that you could maybe put that on your website or print it out, you could do that here. Or if you are using any of our bulk import templates and you're importing data into ArchivesSpace in bulk, you would do that as a background job here as well, depending on the template that you're using and the type of record you're trying to import into ArchivesSpace. And then if you want to use those bulk import templates, you can download them directly in the application here. Under that, you have information related to reports. ArchivesSpace has some canned reports in the system that you can access, pretty like basic reports to export out information. And then it also has some custom reports functionality as well. So if there's a specific type of information you're looking to get out of the application, you could create a custom report and save that as a template and then use that again. And also those templates would be available to other users in your repository. So you could really make use of things that way. And then finally, if you have any plugins in your application, you can invoke those plugins here. ArchivesSpace has one plugin out of the box. That's the Library of Congress Name Authority file import tool. So if you are using the Library of Congress Name Authority file as your thesaurus, and you would like to import subject records and name records directly from the Library of Congress, you can use that tool there. And like I said, that's the only plugin that comes out of the box with ArchivesSpace. All right. Moving over to the other side of this page. This is really where you're probably going to be spending most of your time. This is where you can create and edit records and browse records. You can browse records, obviously here. You'd be browsing for records that are already created. Or you can, if you know the record you are looking for does not yet exist, then you can create the record by hitting the create dropdown and selecting the type of records you'd like to create. I will very briefly go over what these records are quickly, just in the interest of time. But I will spend a little bit more time talking about these three primary records that you see above the line here. These are really the records that you are creating to describe your collections and your materials. These are the important records, right? These are your accession records. So the record that you would create on when you ingest new material. Resource records, which we more commonly call finding aids, right? But the ability to describe your collection and arrange it both intellectually and physically, you would be doing that as resource record. And then digital object records. And I'll spend a little time again talking about each of these records, but digital object records also allow for either that single level or multi-level description of your digital content. And then depending on whether or not maybe it's born digital content or maybe it's a digital reproduction of content you already have, you can link that digital representation back to the physical object in the resource record. So there's a lot of interplay and linkages that you can create between these three record types just to demonstrate how your records all relate to one another. The other records that you see below the line, subject, agent, container profile, location, event, classification, assessment. These are all intended to be created to amplify the accession resource or digital object records. They are records that you would link to. So you would link relevant subject records or agent records, agents meaning names. So you can see how ArchivesSpace divides an agent here. It's a person, a family, a corporate entity, or a software. But people would be described as agent records instead of just subject records, even if they're the subject of the collection. You could also, create location records, either in a single location on a shelf. You just need to create it quickly to say, this is where this box is going. You can do that. Or if you want to create out every single possible shelf location at your organization, you could do that in batch. You also have the ability to do things like create classification records if you want to link relevant collections together in different ways. Events like processing, this collection processing has completed or something like that. You could create an event record or an assessment record where you're actually assessing the material. So all of these are really referenced back to your accession resource and digital object records. And then finally, this is another place where you can invoke background jobs. You'll see throughout the application, there are many ways to get at the different areas of the application. So background jobs can also be created through the Create dropdown. All right, and then the final area of the home page for the staff user interface that I want to point out is this search. So this allows you the ability to search your records. If you're making use of the browse screen, and I'll show that in just a second, you're browsing one specific record type. You can filter, but you're just browsing one specific record type. If you're using the search functionality, you are searching every type of record in the ArchivesSpace application, but only within your current repository. So keep that in mind if you're using multiple repositories. You're only searching within your current repository, but you're searching all record types. You also have the ability to build out advanced searches here. So you can see you can get pretty granular. These advanced search fields can be used in any combination together, but they do need to be connected with Boolean operators. We use and, or, and not. And's the default. And then you can also limit things like by date or by specific scope for the information that you're looking for. I'll go ahead and close these. All right. I'm going to go ahead now and move into talking about and showing what specific record types look like in ArchivesSpace. If you're looking at my screen right now, so you can see I've already pulled up a few that I know are good examples. But if you are browsing or searching for records in ArchivesSpace that you already know exist, you can always use the browse screen, and I'll just show what that looks like really quickly. I'm browsing for an accession record. So when you hit browse, it's going to show you all of the already created and saved accession records because I selected accession in ArchivesSpace. There's 4 in this example. You're able to really filter those results down. Of course, if you have more than 4, you would want to do that by different set of fields on the left-hand side. So here we can filter by date or creator. You also, let's see, if we browse resource records, you can browse by subject, quite a few subjects here to narrow down, as well as filtering by text, so you could search. Also, I'll point out that you're seeing these columns. When I was talking about preference management and the way you would like your columns to display, this was what I was referencing. So right now, we're able to browse the columns of title, identifier, level, date, and extent. Maybe you would like to be able to browse other columns whenever you're looking for your records, and that is a thing that you can customize. So we'll move back to Accessions. You'll notice when you're looking at your records, you can either select to view it in View or Edit. View means exactly that. You're just looking at the record as it's already been created. Edit means that you could potentially make a change to the record. So typically I always open a record and edit because it's what's comfortable to me and what I'm used to, and you never know when you might catch a typo. So that's one thing to point out. And just like I said, there's many different ways to do things in ArchivesSpace. Anytime you are browsing a record type and maybe you can't find it, you can always just go up to the upper right and hit create whatever record type. So if the accession I was looking for wasn't here, I could hit create accession here. And there are other functions as well. As you can see, I don't have time to get into everything, but I just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to be looking at the Krispy Kreme corporate records, accession record. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to that tab. So this is an accession record with completed fields. If you had simply hit create, you would get this, but it would be entirely blank. There are ways to auto-populate data in a new record for accession records and resource records and digital object records. This is like if you have standard language that you like to use for specific fields, maybe your condition governing access node or something like that is consistent across the board. You just don't want to have to always be typing it in. You could use some of those features. But again, don't have time to demo them. I just wanted to point it out. Again, before I start talking about the specific record type, I'll point out we're seeing those content sensitive help links all over the place. So keep in mind those are there for your help. Another great resource in the application is anywhere that you see a field with a title next to it. If you hover over that title, you're going to get this black pop-up, this rollover. These tooltips are associated with almost all of the labels in the ArchivesSpace application. You just hover your mouse like I showed. Typically, the rollover is going to consist of a definition of this element, what it is, and then a reference to whatever appropriate rule in something like DAX, or if it relates to metadata export, so maybe MARC or EAD, it will reference it, and you can see it's referencing it here. And then it may include some examples of good practice or something like that. These tooltips can be completely modified. So you can integrate your own processes here or in your own procedures, or if you're using a different standard like ISAG, you can indicate that here. And then finally, keep an eye out as we're looking at records. Anywhere you see a red asterisk, obviously that indicates it is a required field. So you can't save a record unless you have filled out all of the required fields. Session records are very light on requirements, but as you get into records that have more standards that exist about them, you will see a lot more of these red asterisks. And then I'll very briefly point out, occasionally you'll see a gray asterisk. And what this means, it means that that field is conditionally required. And there will be an explanation of what that means in the tooltip. But it means essentially, if you see a gray, it means something needs to go there or it needs to go somewhere else. You need to decide where you want to put information. Here, it's about how you want to express the date, either as machine readable dates here or as human readable dates. And as you can see, they've elected to do both, which is not bad practice. It's just an internal decision you have to make. All right, so this is an accession record. Accession records store information about the receipt of materials which are initially unprocessed. An accession record in ArchivesSpace can be for a single item or an aggregate of materials, just like we get things in. An accession record can also represent maybe a new resource entirely or an accrual to an existing resource. All you need to do to create a valid accession record is to have an identifier and a date of the accession. Obviously, you're going to want to include much more information than that. So, things like a date, content and condition descriptions, inventories and box lists, things that you see have been included in the relevant fields here. There are many, many fields and many areas of an accession record that you may want to make use of. That would be a decision at your own organization, how granular you want to get with an accession record. And of course, if accession records are not something that you make publicly available as a matter of practice, then maybe you don't want to fill out an accession record so fully. One great thing about accession records is that they can be linked to an existing resource record or digital object record, as well as have related names and subject records linked to them, so that you are able to really link your accession record to other relevant collections or other relevant records. It's also possible to use functionality that we call spawning in the application, again, to try to cut down on effort and labor, the ability to use the information you have already put here to auto-populate some fields in either a new accession record, a resource record, so the beginnings of a finding aid, or an archival object record, so the children of a resource record. And that may make a little bit more sense when I move on to resource records. But the ability basically just to use some of the text you've already put here in a new record type. It isn't, obviously it doesn't copy over as a one-to-one sort of fields, because they're not the same for each record type. So again, just be careful about how much information you're putting in your accession record, and that would be up to you. So this is an accession record, very much, like I said, kind of the simplest record type you're going to see between accession resource and digital object records. So I'm going to go ahead and move over now to a resource record. And I'm going to show you two different resource records in this demo to show you exactly how you can use ArchivesSpace to describe your material. So within the context of ArchivesSpace, resources can be defined as materials that are in the custody of an archival repository and are being controlled according to archival principles, right? So a resource can be a whole collection, or it can be a single item, and it's identified by an identifier or a title. Like I said, resource records are where you place the bulk of information about the intellectual and physical characteristics of archival materials. And within a resource record, you can add a range of descriptive elements, as well as notes, rights statements, and other linked repository records. So you could link this to the accession record, or perhaps if you had digitized this diary, you could link the digital objects back to the diary, so that it's more discoverable, and all of those connections are made within the application. The resource record is where you build that finding aid. So it's also where you can export out finding aids in a variety of formats. So yeah, if you want to export out EAD or Mark XML to use somewhere else, or if you want to export a PDF, like I said, to make available maybe on your website or just to print out, you can do that. So like I said, I'm going to show you two different examples of completed resource records in ArchivesSpace. You see a lot more red asterisks here, a lot more required fields, and a much more sort of complete description of the material. But obviously that's what happens when materials get processed, right? This is essentially a single level resource record. This is a collection that is being described at a single level. There are no series, there are no sub-series, there's none of that hierarchical data that we sometimes see with larger collections, and that's perfectly fine. Everything that you need to know related to this diary is here. Quite a few notes have been added. One thing I want to point out is anytime you have more than 5 of a sub-record in the application, so there are 6 subject records have been linked here, 12 notes have been created, ArchivesSpace automatically just collapses them, and that's just for performance. So if you want to see all of the relevant subject, you just need to click it, and all of your linked subject records will be here. If you want to see all 12 of the notes, you could do that. And you see, this is very familiar to an archivist. We use these notes commonly, and again, there is the ability to auto-populate some of this. Like if your preferred citation is always the same as it likely is here, you could do that. So in addition to that intellectual description, you also have the ability to get that physical control of the material, like we said. So here you can see it's in box 1 of the collection. It's a diary, so I imagine there is only one box. And you could assign a location to this. If there was a digital object instance, you had scanned the diary, you could add that digital object instance here. But this is where you could really describe how you have the physical control of the material as well. So this is a a great resource record in ArchivesSpace. Because it is a single item, though, there is none of that hierarchy. So I would like to move over to another resource record, and these are the Krispy Kreme corporate records. We saw that Accession record earlier. This is a collection that is much larger and has much more content and much more of that archival description and hierarchy there. So all of the records that you see nested under this initial resource record, where the basic information of the collection is, these are called archival object records in ArchivesSpace. And sometimes when you're building it, you'll see that there's a parent-child relationship to how you build these records out, this being the parent, and these are these series are the children of that collection level record. And then if you open up the tabs, you can see that it goes even deeper. So now you have the file levels that are nested under this specific series. And you can see as you're scrolling through, each one of these archival object records has its own location and it has its own container information. And you can really get very specific. And here you see this series actually has subseries within it. And then you open that up and see the files related to that. So ArchivesSpace is very, very adaptive to your own workflows and how you describe your materials. So this is, again, a very good example of a finding aid, but this is a finding aid with a lot of hierarchy. You still have all of this descriptive content for the collection here, still have the notes describing the material, still have, linked your linked agent records, your linked people, your linked subjects. That's a lot of subjects. And then if we go to related accessions, we see that the accession record that we looked at earlier is linked to this collection because it's the accession record for this collection. So that's resource records. Very briefly, but it's where you'll probably spend most of your time. But it's an important area of the application. And with that, I'm going to move over to digital objects in ArchivesSpace. A few important caveats for digital objects. ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system, so you don't ingest or store digital materials in ArchivesSpace. ArchivesSpace supports the management of digital object metadata, so it allows you to manage the description of your archival materials in a single system and link it all together as I showed. The assumption is that the files are being stored and managed somewhere. So in a network or web accessible location, it could be a file server, it could be a digital asset management system. ArchivesSpace is really kind of agnostic about where you store your materials. As long as you are able to generate a relevant file URI, that link that you can provide to ArchivesSpace to tell it, okay, this is where this digital material actually lives. Digital object metadata in ArchivesSpace can be exported as METs, mods, or Dublin Core. So if you need to export your data out of ArchivesSpace, you can do it that way. And you can link digital objects back, like I said, to your resource records and your accession records. So in functionality wise, it's very similar to your resource records and your accession records, but of course, digital objects and how you manage them is very complicated. So this is a digital object record for what we call a simple digital object. And I'll explain that very briefly in just a second. But you notice that the difference here is while you're providing all of that relevant description in the fields, the big difference is this part, the file versions part. So ArchivesSpace requires you to provide a relevant file URI where you can link out to where the material is stored. So if you want your researchers to be able to access material, digital object material from ArchivesSpace, you need to make sure that that is like a workable link, that it's renderable, that it goes somewhere. But as long as you provide that link, ArchivesSpace can make that connection and make it discoverable. This is a still image, as you can see. And like I said, it's considered a simple digital object in ArchivesSpace. It's one where the intellectual content of the object is contained in one digital file. So they're single level in structure, just like that diary that we looked at a minute ago. You could do all of your description here. You don't need to build out any hierarchy. However, occasionally you may want to build out hierarchy for a digital object. Maybe you have like an external hard drive from a creator and you would like to recreate that file structure. So you build a digital object that represents that file structure. So I've moved over here. We have a collection of photographs that have been created as a more complex digital object with that hierarchy. And you see here, these are just static images, but because they're all related to the same collection, they are being described here in a more hierarchical way, very similar to the resource record. There is no right or wrong way in how you want to express your digital objects. If you would like to express them as simple or complex, it's really up to you. I'll give one example and then explain why you do want to make a decision about how you describe your digital objects before you just start. So while a simple digital object is one where it's intellectual content in one single file, a complex digital object is one in which the intellectual content is distributed over 2 or more digital files. They're multi-level, like I said. It's that parent level, parent-child metadata record. However, you could have an instance where one object could be described either way, and you need to make that decision. So for example, let's say you have a scrapbook that's 100 pages, and you digitize that scrapbook, and you take all 100 of those digitized images, and you convert it into a PDF, and you have one single PDF, and there's 100 pages in that PDF, but it's one single file. You would describe that as a simple digital object because it's one single digital file. Or you could choose to scan all 100 of those pages and save them each as individual JPEGs for every single page. Then you have 100 digital files that you would then describe in a hierarchy, because you would create that top level record for the scrapbook, and then you would have page 1 of the scrapbook, page 2, page 3 as children. Both ways are correct and fine. However, if you are looking to export out maybe something like EAD, like if you want to link back that digital object to your collection and then export it with your EAD, you would need to do that as a simple digital object. If you're more interested in exporting out a metadata format, then doing something as a hierarchy may be a better choice for you. It really just depends on what you're looking to get out of the system and how you want to use the system. Digital objects are pretty confusing. There's a lot of functionality and a lot of considerations that have to go into using them, as with anything digital in archives. So there are some great resources on our YouTube channel, including a training about digital objects that's free for anyone to look at on our YouTube channel. I would encourage you, if you're interested in using digital objects in ArchivesSpace, to check that out. All right. So the last part of the demonstration that I'm going to do is related to the public user interface. I'm going to just go home. This is, again, the staff user interface. If you are using the staff user interface and you would like to go to the public user interface, you can always just go to the bottom of whatever page you're on here. Any page, I'm scrolling quickly, sorry. Will have the ability to go to the public user interface. Also, many record types will have the ability to view published. You'll see that as you're working in the application. That takes you directly to the published record, and so you can see exactly what it looks like instead of going to the home screen. But if you hit view public interface from anywhere, any page at the bottom, you're going to go to the public user interface. So this is what the default homepage of the public user interface looks like. This does not have any customizations. Obviously, you are likely to want to customize this because you're going to want your own logo. You're going to want your own colors. You can absolutely do that. It's very customizable. It's also optional. Use of the PUI is optional, and there are organizations that use other tools like ArcLight to serve as their PUI, or maybe you want to integrate your finding aids into your own website some other way, like through PDFs. There are many different options, and of course, some people choose not to make their collections discoverable at all because that's how their organization works. So the public user interface is completely optional. Also, nothing is discoverable on the PUI unless you select publish. So no matter what you include in a record, unless you have published that record to the PUI, it's not going to be discoverable there. So you don't need to worry. Things don't automatically publish to the PUI. It's up to you what you want to publish and what you want to make available to researchers. You need to make sure you're selecting that publish checkbox on the staff interface to display the particular record or part of the record that you want in the public user interface. So within the public user interface, that very familiar search ability here to build out as complex a search as you would like, or just do a basic keyword search here. And you can also narrow the scope of your search. This is probably how most of your researchers are going to discover your materials. The main difference here is you're not just searching across a single repository, you're searching across all of the repositories in your instance. And then you also have the ability to do some browsing. So browsing by material type. So these are all of the resource records within the entire instance of ArchivesSpace that you can browse. And again, very, very filterable depending on what you're looking for. You can search by individual repositories, digital materials. Here you'll notice within this demo database, you have the unprocessed materials or accession records are browsable. You can hide that. If you're in an institution that doesn't make your accession records discoverable, just hide it. As well as the ability to search by names and subjects and record groups, which are classifications in the staff user interface. So there's a lot of possibility here for making things discoverable, and there's a lot of customizations that you can make to really make this your own. On our website, we have a webpage called Who's Using ArchivesSpace. You will see a list of ArchivesSpace members who have elected to be included in that list, and anywhere you see a hyperlink, that means that their public user interface is linked there. It's a great place to go and maybe get some ideas for ways that you can customize. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move back to the slides because I wanted to be done in 3 minutes so I could do Q&A. So let's talk very briefly about ArchivesSpace membership. So as I mentioned before, while the application is free to download news, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Since ArchivesSpace members directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, they're entitled to certain benefits, in addition to the ability to serve on governance councils and provide input on development, like I mentioned earlier. So a little background about membership. Currently, we have 493 ArchivesSpace member organizations around the world, and membership is at the organizational level. So all employees within an organization are entitled to benefits, regardless of your size or how much staff you have. Everyone has access to the same benefits. Membership is distributed across 5 levels with corresponding fees. Membership levels range from very small, which is a $300 membership fee, to very large, which is $7,500. Over half of our members are either in the very small or small organizational category. Memberships are intended to reflect organizational size and capacity, and all members are entitled to the same benefits regardless of size. There are going to be a series of links at the end of this that will help explain how to access benefits as well as how to become a member. Those benefits I keep talking about, you want to know what they are, right? Member benefits include access to the Help Center. That's our where we keep our user manual, user tutorial videos, and recordings of past trainings. Access to member-only events and programs like our member forum that we hold every year. We have a virtual member forum in the spring and an in-person forum in conjunction with SAA every year. We also have programs like our Member Match program, which is a peer-to-peer support group that members can participate in. You also have access to many member-only listservs, which is where we communicate news about the application and users communicate very frequently with each other. And you would get a discount on training. You also would be entitled to technical support of the application, and the best part, the ability to collaborate with archivists around the world and to guide development of the application and the member community. And finally, there's this slide, and again, I'll make sure it's included with the recording. These are helpful links that you may want to explore as you're considering ArchivesSpace. You can also find all of this on our website. The first link is a Getting Started page, which will help you with some basic information, much of which you just learned today, but instructions for downloading the application, that sort of thing. You can also watch other demos or access our sandbox. Our sandbox is an open play space. It's a great way to experience ArchivesSpace if you haven't before. The username and password are admin. Anyone can access it though, so make sure you don't put anything there you don't want other people to see or that you want to keep for the future. There's a link here where we explain our member benefits, the fees, and the levels that I just went over. And if you are really interested in ArchivesSpace at your organization and are struggling to bring that up with your supervisor or whoever, we have a document here to help you make a case for ArchivesSpace that has some talking points about what ArchivesSpace membership does, considering who you may be talking to and what their interests may be. And then here's that Who's Using ArchivesSpace link that I mentioned. It's a great opportunity to see who may be working in a similar environment to you is already using ArchivesSpace, and our email below. So with that, I'm going to move into the question portion, the Q&A portion. Again, feel free to email us if you have any questions at all. I may move back up to this slide with the resources link, since that probably has the best information for people, and we'll move into the Q&A. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop that into the Q&A, and I will get to them. Let's see what we've got. All right, so Elizabeth asked, how many records can ArchivesSpace support? Would this application be suitable for a business archive of a multinational or very large archive? Yeah, so ArchivesSpace doesn't have a limit in terms of how many records can be there. That would be dependent on maybe the resources that you have assigned to the application. ArchivesSpace does not host the application itself, meaning the ArchivesSpace program team that I'm a member of. We don't support the app, or we don't host the application. If you're looking to use a hosting provider, feel free to email us and we can give you a few different options for hosting and can explain exactly how hosting works. Hosting is separate from membership. So any hosting relationship that you would have would not include ArchivesSpace membership, But the application itself does not limit how many records that you can create. And then Elizabeth also asked, how much support does it require from an internal IT departments to implement and run? We do have a page in our technical documentation that it goes over, and Elizabeth, if you want to email us, I can provide this to you, goes over the technical requirements in terms of how many resources it needs to run. You can maybe provide that to someone at your organization to see if it's something that they think they could support. And it is free to download and use, so they could just try it and see how it goes. If internally an organization realizes that it's not something that they can support within their infrastructure, there are, like I said, many different hosting providers that you may want to consider, and they would be able to talk with you and talk about exactly what your needs are. But again, hosting is separate from membership. Laura asked, to confirm for the membership levels, are the FTEs at the institutional level? For example, at a university, would the FTE count would the FTE count be the whole staff of our library, at which we are a unit of? So for academic institutions, it would be based on either your JSTOR or Carnegie classification. We don't base it on FTEs for academic institutions. You would automatically be put into the very large category if you did that. So if you are associated with an academic institution or a public library, it would be based on your JSTOR or Carnegie classification. If you don't know that, the person that is responsible for managing your subscription services likely would know it. Great, Laura. We have very high security concerns with software at my university. Who would I work with to get in front of these concerns? These conversations and questions go a bit over my head when they get into the technical weeds. I hear you. If you would like to email us, this probably is a conversation that we could best have over email. But like you said, if there's specific questions or concerns, if you could get those in, have them written down and email them to us, we can tackle them that way. But in the meantime, it might be helpful to show whoever at your organization is having those concerns, either maybe our GitHub as well as our technical documentation, and have them look at the system requirements and that sort of thing, and see exactly what other questions they have after they view that. Selena asked, what keyboard languages do the application support? And I don't know the answer to that. Christine, do you know?
So I would say in general, ArchivesSpace can support any language, any script, as long as it uses UTF-8 encoding. So if you're able to produce from your keyboard things that have UTF-8 encoding, ArchivesSpace can support that. So you don't have to have a keyboard that only has English language characters on it. You can use many different keyboards to get things into ArchivesSpace, as long as the encoding matches up with what ArchivesSpace supports.
Thanks, Christine. All right, any other questions? Or while we wait to see if any other questions come in, Christine is the program manager for ArchivesSpace. I did not introduce her, but she's been here the whole time. Anything that you would like to clarify or add for this demo?
No, I mean, Jessica has given you a great overview of the kinds of functionality ArchivesSpace has, as well as, what our model is, how ArchivesSpace is sustained, as well as how ArchivesSpace supports those who use the application. And, really, one of the great benefits of being an ArchivesSpace member is really, that interaction in our community. We have a very supportive community, people that really look to help out each other. And also Jessica has shown you what the core application does. Lots of people in our community have also extended the ArchivesSpace application by building plugins and scripts and different custom things that they very willingly share with others in the community. So sometimes if you're not seeing it in ArchivesSpace itself, someone else has had that idea and they're very willing to share. And so when you participate in the member community, you get sort of that extra insight into what people are doing out there, all kinds of great things.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Not seeing any other questions in the Q&A, so I'm speaking very slowly, but we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for attending this demonstration. And again, if you have any questions or if we didn't thoroughly answer your question today, please feel free to email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org and we would be happy to get you more information. And if you are interested in ArchivesSpace membership, again, just email us there and we will be happy to get that process started for you. Thank you to everyone, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.